There are moments in life that feel like a door slamming shut, sharp, final, and deliberate. But sometimes, what sounds like an ending is merely the echo of someone else's beginning. This is one of those stories. And it happened right here, in the manicured hills of Charleston, South Carolina, on a Thursday evening in late October, inside a dining room that had seen generations of secrets, toasts, and quiet, devastating lies. The house belonged to Gerald and Patricia Holt, old Carolina money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Their eldest son, Simon Holt, 38 years old, had grown up learning that power was performance, that dominance was theater, and on this particular evening, he had come dressed for a show. He wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a white-fitted shirt, dark trousers, brown Oxford shoes, polished to a mirror. His hair was combed back. His jaw was set. He looked, by every visible measure, like a man who had already won something. Seated across from him, at the far end of the long mahogany table, was his wife, Marion Holt, 34 years old, 7 months pregnant, wearing a simple ivory wrap dress. Elegant and understated, her dark hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. No dramatic jewelry, no performance. Just a woman who had arrived at dinner carrying a leather document folder, which she set quietly beside her plate without explanation, and nobody asked about it. Not yet. What you are about to witness is not simply a story about a divorce. It is a story about assumption. The deadly, arrogant kind. The kind that convinces a person they know exactly who is sitting across from them when in truth they have never looked closely enough to see. This is a story about betrayal, not the loud, explosive kind that announces itself at the door, but the slow, calculated kind built quietly in boardrooms and attorneys' offices and private phone calls taken in locked bathrooms at midnight, while the person being underestimated sits in the next room and says nothing. And this is a story about regret, the specific, irreversible kind that arrives not as a whisper, but as a verdict, the kind you see land on a man's face when he realizes, in front of everyone he has ever tried to impress, that the move he thought was his masterstroke was actually the moment he dismantled his own empire with his own 2 hands. By the end of this evening, nothing in the Holt family dining room would be the same. Reputations would fracture, alliances would shift, and a woman who had been spoken over, dismissed, and quietly mocked for years would rise from that table, having lost a husband and kept absolutely everything else. The lesson? Never confuse silence with surrender. Dinner had barely begun when Simon reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and produced a sealed envelope. He didn't hand it to Marion immediately. He let it sit beside his bread plate for a long, visible moment, like a weapon being displayed before use. His mother, Patricia, glanced at it nervously. His father, Gerald, continued cutting his steak without expression. Simon's younger brother, Daniel, exchanged a quick, uncomfortable look with his girlfriend across the table. Nobody spoke. The room understood, the way rooms sometimes do, that something ugly was about to happen, and no one had yet decided whether to stop it. Then Simon slid the envelope down the length of the table toward Marion, slowly, deliberately, smiling, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Consider yourself served." Finally, Marion looked down at the envelope. She did not flinch. She did not reach for it immediately. She simply placed one hand gently over her rounded abdomen, a quiet, instinctive gesture, and then, after a long moment of silence that felt like it swallowed the entire room, She picked it up, opened it, and read. The table watched her face for collapse, for tears, for the particular devastation of a woman being publicly discarded while carrying her husband's child. It never came. She set the divorce papers down beside her untouched glass of water, folded her hands, looked at Simon with an expression that would later be described by everyone present as something between pity and patience, and said quietly, "Thank you, Simon. I've been waiting for those." His smile faltered only slightly, because he had expected drama, pleading, a scene. He had, in fact, been counting on it. What happened instead was this. Marion reached for the leather document folder beside her plate, unzipped it with calm, deliberate hands, and removed a second set of documents heavier, bound in blue legal cover, which she passed not to Simon, but to the empty seat beside him, where, at that exact moment, a door at the far end of the dining room opened, and a man in a charcoal suit walked in. Mid-50s, silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, carrying a briefcase, moving with the quiet authority of someone entirely unbothered by the volcanic tension filling that room. His name was Reginald Okafor, one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the state of South Carolina, and he had not come for dinner. He had come for one specific reason, at one specific time, and Marion had arranged every detail of it with the kind of precision that only becomes possible when you have been planning something for a very, very long time. Reginald took the seat, opened his briefcase, set his glasses on his nose, and began to read aloud from the bound document, not the divorce papers, but the other document. The one Simon had signed 6 weeks earlier on a routine Friday afternoon without reading past the first page, because Simon Holt had always operated under the assumption that the important things in his world were the things he initiated, and anything else was background noise. He had not known, could not have imagined, that buried within that standard restructuring agreement was a spousal asset clause tied to a separate acquisition deal that Marion had been negotiating privately for 14 months, a deal involving a biotech licensing portfolio she had inherited from her late grandmother and spent 3 quiet, invisible years building into something extraordinary. The deal had closed 2 weeks before that dinner, valued at $1.3 billion. And because Simon had signed the restructuring agreement which, under Carolina marital property law, had formally acknowledged Marion's independent business holdings as entirely separate from their marital estate, he had, in the same thoughtless stroke, signed himself out of any legal claim to a single dollar of it. Reginald's voice was steady and unhurried as he read the figures aloud into the silence of that chandelier-lit room, and the effect was immediate and total. Daniel set his wine glass down so carefully it made no sound. Patricia's face went the color of the white tablecloth. Gerald stared at the centerpiece as though it had spoken. And Simon sat with the divorce papers still in front of him, the papers he had delivered with such theatrical cruelty just minutes before, and said absolutely nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Then, after a long and devastating silence, he managed, You planned this?" And Marion looked at him for a moment that seemed to stretch well past the boundaries of that room, picked up her glass, took a slow sip of water, set it back down with perfect composure, and said, "I planned for every possibility, including this one." Simon Holt had walked into that dining room certain he was ending something. He had dressed for it, rehearsed it, savored it in advance, wanted his family to watch him close a door on a woman he had decided was beneath him, a quiet wife, a pregnant inconvenience. A chapter he was ready to finish, with a flourish of cruelty disguised as confidence. Instead, they watched him discover that the door he had so dramatically swung shut had been a door to nothing. That the woman he had spent years underestimating had not been waiting for him to destroy her, but had been waiting, patiently and brilliantly, for him to hand her the last piece she needed, and he gave it to her at dinner, in front of everyone, dressed in his best clothes, wearing his most satisfied smile. Betrayal, they say, is most devastating when it arrives dressed as confidence. Regret, they say, is sharpest when it finds you in a room full of witnesses. Simon Holt would spend a long time afterward replaying that Thursday evening, the envelope, the smile he had worn, the sound of Reginald's voice reading numbers that no longer had anything to do with him, and Marion walked out of that house that night with her folder under her arm, her head level, her child safe beneath her heart, and everything she had ever built entirely intact. She never looked back, because the quietest person in the room is often the one who no longer needs to speak because they already won.